So these are wishes that we have, since this is very fruitful for us as discussion, also as pedagogical tools for students, for us as scholars, artists, very enriching discussion that took place this weekend. So the aim of the next panel is to look at art from a contemplative point of view, contemplative practice. So in academia, this would fall under the practice-based research, a method which brings first-person discourse, so the experience, and third-person discourse, so whatever we've read, citation, and so on. Wendelin Morrison, who is in the UK, participates online today, and I will tell a little more about her when her time comes. But she will bring us to Dunhuang caves or close by and present her contemplative approach to research and art practice. Peter Makela, a recipient of the Fulbright Scholarship, and I will tell more about him in a little bit, will share his reflection on painting, inspired partly or maybe wholly by sky gazing. Some of his paintings are exhibited downstairs. I strongly encourage you to go see in room 103 some of his paintings. And Shreeti Pradhan, who is doing a BA dissertation here at RYI this semester, and she will talk about her work on Lakshminkara Chinamunda, Secrecy and Non-Conceptuality in connection with her training in Caryā dance. Her work is also part of the exhibit, so I encourage you to go read. I think the concept that she's bringing to us is very poignant. So after each presentation, we will seek to clarify some questions coming from our panel and then from the audience. And at the end, I will offer a short response, as we've been doing, and then we can engage in further discussion. And I suggest that we have two kind of section of the larger discussion. One, which will be a discussion of this panel in a larger way, but then another one which will open as a way to open the discussion over the whole of the conference, and so that we can ask questions that we may not ask, answer some of the questions that haven't been answered, at least propose some suggestions. And so this is the way I think we should proceed. So we will start with Wendelin, who is with us already with us. Very good. Welcome. Dr. Wendelin Morrison is an artist and a researcher specializing in the sacred art and ritual of Tibetan Buddhism. Wendelin's research interests include Dunhuang studies, Tibetan Buddhist sacred art and its practice, and the medicinal plant of the Himalayas. Our current research is on the 11th century Thangka painting of Tara and the 8 Perils from the library cave of Mogao Caves near Dunhuang in northwestern China, which is part funded through the Frederick Williamson's Memorial Fund, Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, University of Cambridge. She is currently a visiting research fellow at the Department of Archaeology and Anthropology in Bournemouth University in the United Kingdom. Wendelin is also a practicing sacred artist and a meditation teacher in Tibetan and Chinese Buddhist tradition. So please welcome warmly with me, Wendelin Morrison.
Thank you very much, Jan. Can you hear me? Okay. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Good, I can hear you. Great. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and I'm really pleased I'm able to join you, even though it's only via Zoom. It's very meaningful to me to be here today. Writing the paper for this conference has been internal pilgrimage practice for me. And it's taken as its path the reconstruction of the sacred grid of Tara and the 8 perils. Well, some of you might know her as Tara and the 8 fears, or even Tara and the 8 obscurations. My research and my practice have been as artist and researcher together, and they're not separate. But whether there's been realization as a result of this research, I can't really say. So perhaps at the end of my paper, when we're having the discussion, some of you might have some perspective on this. My research has gone from place to place. It is multi-directional, and this in some way connects it to the landscape of the Silk Roads, with the mountains, deserts, isolated scree slopes, the land, water, rolling hills, very green, and also whispering sands. Valleys and lakes, wandering here and there. Here we have a picture of the singing sand dunes of Dunhuang, just outside the Morgao caves. It's from a photograph from the Needham Institute. Here we have a painting from the Morgao caves. This is, maybe he's a monk, maybe he's just a wandering practitioner, maybe he's a storyteller. He's often called the wandering storyteller in the Dunhuang studies. And on his back here, there he goes, you can see he's carrying Thangka on his back. So, excuse me. My research sits within the 5 knowledges of Buddhist studies. And although my main practice is within the study of art and the practice of art, sacred art, actually all the 5 sciences come together through the practice. So one of the things that's always confused me as both a practitioner, also anthropologist and archaeologist, has been why art historians always explain, give a description of the art that they're talking about. And I began to wonder why they did this. Suddenly, through doing this practice, I've recognized that it's because if people aren't quite able to see the image very clearly, sometimes it can help to have a description. And in that way, they're acting like a translator, because the language of the Thangka is the language that is visual. We can see this in front of us. So I'm going to give you a description from this wandering storyteller who brought this Thangka to the Dunhuang caves in the 11th century. He brought with him an emanation of Tara that's very rare. And through my research, whenever I've lost my direction in, rocky mountain passes, avoiding precipices or robbers, this type of thing, or maybe an occasional elephant lost its way in the desert. So She has illuminated the way. So I'll read for you now the description. Tara, her body as radiant as the golden autumn moon, sits in Lalitasana, the body mudra of royal ease, atop a gold moon seat which shines as bright as the sun at the center of a rainbow lotus surrounded by the leaves of the Caryā tree. Her beautiful face is radiant, eyes shaped like a bow in restful meditation, red lips formed like a butterfly's wings, and ears curved like delicate conch shells either side of her graceful head, which is tilted in contemplation. Her long jet-black hair is tied at the top in a triple knot, crowned by a radiant golden tsungto, the Ushnisha flame of awakening, and fine strands fall in waves like streams across her shoulders. Adorned with the 8 jewel ornaments, she wears a diadem adorned by 5 precious and exceptionally rare jewels, rising from the center of tiny golden lotuses placed along a floating red streamer, ornament the face of the Buddha. Delicate white silk streamers flow down from behind her diadem to meet the rainbow petals of her lotus throne. With arms gently touched by swirling silk scarves of darkest red, lined with the color of the night sky, her left hand is in the Sun Surya mudra, facing outwards, held close to her heart, and her right hand, fingers just touching right knee in Surya mudra, palm upwards in offering of abundance. Between thumb and 4th finger of each hand is held the delicate thread of a lotus stem as it rises upwards. Floating above at Tara's throat, the white Indian lotus, tinged with the clear pale blue of early morning sky, is in full bloom, its red heart petals edged with gold. Her torso, with meditational shawl tied across from her left shoulder, and round, low breasts, is gracefully curved in a dancing movement, her right leg stepping lightly onto a full, small, open pink lotus, which grows upon an elegant stem adorned with beautiful, wide, curling leaves, and rising up from the clear crystal lake in which the central lotus seat floats. Left leg in half lotus position, her feet are adorned with golden jeweled sandals and legs draped by floating rainbow striped trousers like umbrellas topped by jewels at the knee. Her radiant body is surrounded by the light of a complete perfection to help all sentient beings in all realms without hesitation. So this is a short description of the Tara from the Morgao caves, and as can be seen, perhaps I'll go back to her. The central deity is surrounded by 9 forms of Tara. Each one of the aspects is a different color, and they are like her radiance. The energies are not separate from her. They're her colored light rays. She has actually, she's not got 8 Taras with her. She has 9. And I'm going to run through these very quickly with you now. So first of all, we have the dark green Tara. This is the only Tara in the painting with a different colored lotus. This is a clear white Tara. You can see she's particularly clear by the use of blue paint, a very light blue paint, in addition to the white paint, which is showing her body. She's very delicate. You can notice on each of the Taras, if you look at the hand that's making offering, by her knee, you can see there's jewel vases receiving below each hand. Here we have another white Tara. The paint, slight discoloration of the paint makes it difficult sometimes to see the colors very clearly because of its condition of preservation. Here we have a very pale yellow Tara, almost like first milk from a new mother kind of color. Deep red Tara. You can see below, just here, this is what she's protecting from. Fear of snakes. You can just see he's a little bit rubbed away there, but you can just see a little man running away from the snake there. Here we have storm-colored Tara. You see the clouds swirling behind her there. And also you can notice she has breasts like a mother who's fed a lot. Golden yellow Tara. Golden red Tara. And at the top of the Thangka, we have Amitabha Buddha. This is, so just you can see her face a little clearer, a little more closely. You can also see the fabric which the Thangka has been painted on in terms of the need for some restoration. And here we have the two monks on either side of Amitabha Buddha. These two monks have been a major question and creating a real enigma for Dunhuang studies since the library cave was first opened. In Dunhuang, this is the place that these Thangka was found. There's many caves, 1,000 caves created through the vision of a monk who first visited the desert site and saw a vision of 1,000 Buddhas. And within these caves in the 1900s, early 1900s, I think exactly 1900 actually, there was a monk who, oh, here is 9th Tara at the very bottom of the painting. So we can see here Pradhan Lama. As a part of my practice, I've been very lucky in that I've had many wonderful teachers who've been able to help support my practice throughout. And here we have a monk who is actually a Taoist monk, and the caves at Dunhuang, when in 1900 he was looking after these caves, self-appointed, part, no doubt, of his practice of the scripture of the 10 precepts as a Taoist monk. Let me just close this. In China, he's known as Wang Yuanlu, but I am reinstating his ordained name of Fazhen. I feel this is very important because he was the first person who rediscovered the library cave within the cave number 16 at the Dunhuang Mogao site. He was apparently doing some restoration work, doing some cleaning, and there's many tales of how he came across it, but he found a door behind a painted wall, and within that was a huge cache, a storehouse of treasures, hundreds and thousands, in fact, of manuscripts, paintings, and materials from the 10th century. So here you can see, as it is today, the entrance of the cave. You can see the wall paintings that were covering it. So it's now called the Hidden Library Cave, or Cave 16. This is an old photograph from the Needham Institute to give you an idea of the exterior of the caves. Some of them are open to the elements. And Fajen then encountered this gentleman, Orelstein, who was an archaeologist, a very early archaeologist and scholar, who's Hungarian, British. He became British, born in Hungary. This is his dog, Dash, first incarnation. And at the bottom of the screen, you can see this is the area around Dunhuang, some of the men who he worked with. And you can see second or third, I can't remember, reincarnation of Dash. This is a small fox terrier who came with him on his expeditions. He had many Dashes. This is a reconstruction of that same photograph without Dash, unfortunately. And in the center, you can see my husband there and his colleagues from the British Library who studied for the International Dunhuang project, where this materials for this come from. This is a photograph of the type of ornamentation that you get in the caves at Dunhuang: Chinese, Tibetan. We also have Khotanese and Tangut. Many cultures all coming together on the Silk Road. Here we have what you can see behind as part of the collection from inside the caves. This is taken inside the cave with another French, this time, scholar, Paul Pelliot, who brought many of the scrolls to France. And here we have today the Thangka of Tara in the British Museum, where I went to visit it. This is part of my practice. So here we have some chalk, which is used for making ground. At the center, this was the beginning of my journey. Another Tangut Thangka of Tara. And on this side, we have a cat's eye, which is the part of the end of the journey. The center of cat's eye, it's made from creosote, not creosote, it's chrysoberyl. It's a type of beryllium which makes this color. And in the very center of this is either a ruby or a sapphire that makes the star of the cat's eye. Here we have Tara. And my practice was to reconstruct the grid from this Thangka painting. So this sketch has been through a reconstruction of the grid that came through my practice. And as I continued on with my practice, I showed my complete not listening to my inner self by bringing a measuring tape with me when I went to the British Museum. But that's okay, it's all part of the journey, and totally surrendering after a time to allow Tara to be there. The reconstruction of the grid appeared, and this came very, very clearly with the teachings totally unexpectedly and appearing through the second. I'll show you in a minute. So this is my photograph of the Tara Thangka. This is the manuscripts currently held at the British Library, because the manuscripts are at the British Library and the drawings and paintings and things on materials are at the British Museum from the Stein collection that is in England. There are a number of collections around the globe, but the International Dunhuang project from the British Library brought all of these together digitally, so you can access them digitally online if you're interested. My practice for this Tara began when I was first pregnant with my first daughter, Tara, and she's now 12 years old. And the progression of this piece of research has been very much a journey of artist and a returning of the scholar into my daily practice. So I hope this has given a little taste of what my journey has been. I want to say thank you very much to all of the wonderful friends, helpers, and most of all teachers who have enabled me to be able to present today, and who've also enabled the research to be undertaken. The Tara Thangka in the Dunhuang Hidden Library Cave is most certainly been a question for many scholars for many years. They didn't understand the appearance of monks from a later period in an earlier period cave that had been sealed. My research has shown that there's been a misconception about the color of the monks' hats, which has been made very clear through referencing the original record made by Stein, but also this came through my practice initially, and only at the end of my practice did I come across the original record from Stein, where he said, this Tara has been entirely gilded, her body is gold, and also the colors of the hats at the top of the Thangka are not yellow, as all scholars have assumed, and for which I, from the very beginning, did not believe to be yellow. But in actual fact, we have one which is white and one which is red, but with gold edging on the red and red edging on the white hat and on the Pandita hats. This has given a really good indication of the period of the Thangka, and it's also given a wonderful opportunity for us to see that the Thangka, whatever date appears, this is been placed into the cave in order for us to be able to understand better the collection within it. So I hope that's given a little insight into Tara. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. I look forward to any questions. I hope I've been clear enough, and over to you.
Thank you very much. It's really great to be traveling in these parts of the world. First of all, I would like to open the discussion among panelists. So I'm wondering if Peter or Shreeti would have a question.
Sure. Thank you very much for that beautiful talk, and thank you very much for including a picture of Dash. The only thing that's been missing from this conference has been dog pictures, so thank you for that.
Okay.
So also about the colors, since you're a painter, were you studying the pigments that were being used in this Thangka? It's hard to tell with the blues, that were they using lapis and azurite or both? I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Thank you. In the Thangka, I have not been able to make any scientific analysis of the paints, but what I have been doing during the research has been to be both collecting and making my own pigment paints. This stage of the research has been the reconstruction of the grid and the initial sketch of Tara, my next stage of research is to paint the full Thangka, and as part of that practice, I'll also be looking at more closely the pigment paints themselves, because there are a few little questions that can help to resolve also about the date of the Thangka itself, which is very significant for the sealing, the date of the sealing of the cave. And one of the things that also I feel is so significant in relation to this Thangka is the use of the colors, the pigment themselves actually having medicinal properties. And this is something that one can say for any of the paintings in Dunhuang, whether it's the wall paintings or whether it's paintings on silk, doesn't really matter. People notice, scholars have noticed the changes in the paintings at Dunhuang, where we have, you know, the brown and green period, where we have the more Indian style paintings, or with orange. You know, we have periods where blue is introduced, and we have later periods then much later on where we start to get yellows appearing. And the artists themselves are almost vanished from the descriptions that people give. So the practice of undertaking the paintings, the practice of making, you know, grinding the stones, how they were able to either bring them with them or have them traveling down the Silk Road from various places, because they're in the desert, they're not in the Himalayas, they can't, you know, go just straight out and access those materials themselves. All of these aspects are significant to the color. And with blue, your question about the blue, the lapis lazuli has most certainly been used within this Thangka, and you can see that through the depth of the color. The question of azurite, I think that needs a little bit more exploration, and you do get azurite coming in at a much later date than lapis. But lapis will have traveled down the Silk Road from the direction of Afghanistan, so is coming from a different direction. Let me just western direction, and the use of the blue in the Thangka. There's been a lot of discoloration over through age, and whether or not we'll be able to do non-invasive analysis from an academic point of view, I think is very exciting. And I hope to make some connections with Il Foscare in Italy. They have a number of people who work with Dunhuang wall paintings there and also do conservation and analysis. So that's a lovely connection. But there's also people who are working in Nottingham Trent University, a scholar and scientist who has done some non-invasive analysis using machinery that uses light refraction from the pigments. So I hope that gives a little way to understanding the different colors. I'm glad you liked Dash.
Thank you, Shreeti.
Hi, Dr. Wendelin. Thank you for sharing your wonderful presentation. I don't have a question in particular, but I was just wondering if it would be possible to access your slides or the pictures would love to have a look at it again.
Yes, I'm sure that would be fine. It's something that requires a little time to absorb, I think, sometimes, and one has to move swiftly.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank
So
you very much.
Our next speaker, and we will continue the discussion afterwards, so please stay with us. Our next speaker is Peter Makela. He's a 2022 Fulbright student researcher in visual arts and to Nepal. He received his MFA in painting from the Leroy Hofburger School of Painting at the Maryland Institute College of Art and his BFA in painting and drawing from the School of Arts Institute of Chicago. So lots of painting. Makela has exhibited his painting nationally and internationally, and most recently had a large solo exhibit, Painting the Sky, Painting the Earth, at the Pradhan Museum. He is particularly interested in luminosity, the interaction of color, petroglyphs, traditional pigment, and exploring the spontaneity through paint. Thank you. Please welcome Peter.
Thank you very much, Diane. Thank you all for coming. So this talk will also double as my final Fulbright presentation. So great, could we also go to the next slide, please? So I would like to express my gratitude to the Fulbright who gave me this incredible opportunity to be in Nepal for a year to explore this project. I would like to also thank Rangchen Yeshe, who is the host institution, and particularly Diane, who's so generous and kind. Thank you. The Kramer Pigments, who provided so many incredible pigments for me to use for the last year, and the Joseph and Ani Albers Foundation, who provided mini color aid packets so that I could teach the interaction of color at Kathmandu University. Okay, so next slide, please. So an appreciation and investigation of the nature of light permeates both the history of painting and many contemplative traditions. What is the nature of light? What is outer light and what is inner light? And is there a difference? I often think about this striking remark made by Einstein a few years before his death. All the 50 years of conscious brooding here brought me no closer to the question, what are light quanta? Of course, today, every rascal thinks he knows the answer, but he is only deluding himself. It's quite humbling to think that one of the greatest minds of the last century didn't even have a firm understanding of light and its operations. In this way, as a painter, I'm not so much interested in understanding luminosity as I am in experiencing it. And I'm mainly interested in experiencing it through painting, and particularly painting the sky. Next slide, please. So instead of trying to understand light externally, painting the sky is a way for me to investigate its interdependent and non-dual nature through the 5 colors and their interaction. I don't have answers to these questions, but I have had different experiences regarding them. Experiences that arose through painting the sky. That is not painting the sky as an object or as a notation of the weather, but as an experience of light made up of the interdependent play of the 5 colors. As Longchenpa said in his Finding Rest in the Nature of Mind, the clear sky in the outer world is but an image of the vast sky of the ultimate reality within. Slide, please. In the process of gazing at the sky, observing a color play or a shifting intercolor relationship, mixing a related color in paint and then spontaneously applying it to the canvas with a presence and a free stroke, my aim is to not conceptually illustrate light or the sky, but to let the clarity spontaneously arise through the interaction of experience and materiality. In a way, this type of painting is maybe reminiscent of Lao Tzu's teaching, use your own light and return to the source of light. This is called practicing eternity. How can I get closer to the nature of limitless space and luminosity through the act of painting? I initiated this investigation 5 years ago by starting a series of sky paintings while reading Madhyamaka authors such as Nagarjuna and Shakya Chokten, inspired by their philosophy of emptiness and dependent arising. Although this initial study helped expand my mind, the more deeply I delved into the study of the sky, luminosity, and non-duality, the more deeply I was led into the work of Longchenpa and Dudjom Rinpoche. Sky, please. Slide, please. But the sky doesn't have a boundary. The sky doesn't have an edge. The sky is all pervasive and limitless. Painting the sky is a way to paint from observation and experience because I'm looking at it, but it's also a way through direct observational painting to not paint an object. Painting has been a way for me to bring study and practice together. Over the last 5 years, the more I practice this way, the more I see what is so essential to space and light is color and the interdependent color interaction. Through the different interdynamics of saturation, value, and temperature, the luminosity can emerge. Through looking at the sky, it's an ever-changing dance of the 5 colors. It's not flat. There is dimensionality and openness. There are purple greens and lights and so many interesting phenomena in the space we call sky. It isn't just about the external phenomena, but also connected to the workings of the inner eye and their dynamics with mental formations and habitual tendencies. This practice of painting has been an integral part of my Fulbright project, which has allowed me to live and work in Nepal for the last year, a project initially supported by the RYI community. Equally essential to these paintings as color presence is the state I am in when I paint. A priority of the work is mixing the right color and putting it down, but equally crucial are the brush strokes and the uncontrived nature of the stroke that is immediate and in direct response to what I'm observing and feeling. There's a connection here to be made with what in Buddhism is called the alaya, the repository of habits, both positive, negative, or neutral, and perhaps with time of direct experience, free of all contrivances. A painting becomes a tapestry that arises through that. The great 20th century American painter Robert Henry said, "Every brushstroke is a portrait of the artist at that moment." I would like my paintings to ideally be a tapestry of present moments, and then that then make up an inner sky that is in response to an outer sky, and ideally merging into a place where separation is indistinguishable. Slide, please. As for the brushstroke, it has to be free, it has to be felt, it has to be uncontrived, unplanned. Maybe there's a kind of searching or freshness that comes from a real presence. I feel that this is essential to painting the sky. As I said before, I'm not interested in illustrating a sky or manufacturing a type of a postcard of a sky. Through the act of painting, I'm seeking to have an experience of skyness, which is visually conveyed through the painting process. The sky is not stuck, it's not limited. One cannot fixate on something that has no top and no bottom, no center and no periphery. When painting the sky, the brushstroke can't be either limited or grasped at. Slide, please. The sky I'm interested in doesn't really have a form. When I started painting the sky years ago, the paintings were very literal. I was focusing on the clouds as an object. I was focusing on the weather. It was very externally oriented, very much influenced by a grasping-like perception. But the more I painted the sky, the more things became open and less rigid. I used to call this painting, this practice Sky Nundro, with the aspiration that by painting 100,000 sky paintings, I would come to some understanding or experience. I've painted around 400 so far, so I still have a long way to go. Slide, please. But already there have been some big shifts in my changing perception. And a lot of it has to do with color. They've gained a wide scope of chromatic expression. This is not color for color's sake, but it occurs in response to colors that are actually happening when I'm observing the sky. Slide, please. Last summer, I was very fortunate to meet the great teacher and painter Drüga Chögyam Rinpoche in Pokhara. He very generously gave me an hour of his time, and we spent that time mainly discussing painting and contemplation. He said many interesting things, but one of them that particularly stuck with me was, if you have a small mind, when you look at the sky, you won't see many colors. The bigger your mind is, that is, the more expansive your mind is, the more colors you will see. The Buddha sees millions of colors, colors we can't even imagine. Slide. It's interesting to note that this is what has been happening over these years of continuous sky painting practice. Color is something that is very hard to talk about. You can't pin it down or formulate it. This is one of the reasons I'm so interested in the work of Joseph Albers. His color interaction work is not about color wheels or learning that this color is the opposite of that color. It's all about your direct experience of color. The more expansive one's mind is, the more colors one sees. This reminds me of a delightful John Ruskin quote. The purest and most thoughtful minds are those which love color the most. Slide, please. There's maybe a connection with the clarity of a crystal, an example used in many Tibetan texts. If it is clear with no obscurations or interference, when the light shines through it, there will be a perfect rainbow. If there are lots of inclusions, that light and color will be diffuse and confused. Maybe there's a similarity with our experience. The clearer our mind becomes, as fewer distractions occupy it, the brighter and more luminous and colorful it shines. Slide. Limitless space, color, and light, sky as direct observation. These are the main focuses of the sky painting series, which I'll probably continue in some form or other for the rest of my life. But there are also other ways to investigate similar things. When I contemplate limitless space, I also contemplate limitless beings. In addition to exploring luminosity, I also ask myself, how can I explore and express that? I don't just want to explore the formless aspect of emptiness. I also want to explore the form aspect. My second series of paintings, land paintings, arose from wanting to explore this form aspect of emptiness. Working with color and rhythm and form in a spontaneous way, there's no plan. There's no premeditated structure. I'm interested in what arises naturally. There's not a set style for these paintings, or at different times, different languages will arise and inform each other and shape them. Even though they are land paintings, I want them to be formless in their freedom and fluidity of visual languages. I want these land paintings to be fluid and free, but I also want them to be informed by the land they're on. Being in Kathmandu for the last year, I would go to many different shrines every day and make offerings and connect. I felt that the more I did that, the more non-bodied entities or forms would come through the work in non-linear and unplanned ways. Maybe due to the nature of the Kathmandu Valley and its history, a lot of the forms and beings that arose are Naga related. Slide, please. Many of the land paintings are on paper and are more like drawings. They are similar, but they are faster because they all start with a watercolor. And then sometimes I will paint delicate lines, so there's a rhythm, a music, and air. And then I'll just move the pen and these forms will emerge. They're about light and space in a different way, but they're also about the 8 different classes of beings and how these beings are everywhere, how they fill all space. Slide. If you think about particles and sunlight, maybe it's like that, but with beings. Those images of particles and sunlight also surprisingly look like galaxies. These drawings with many floating beings are like a microscopic or macroscopic view of that, depending on your perspective. They are forms, but they're also free, spontaneous marks, calligraphic strokes. Rio Sancha, a profound smoke offering practice where one envisions countless offerings being made to all sentient beings, has also greatly informed these land paintings. You invite everyone and everyone gets what they need and everything is purified. One does this by creating physical smoke offerings, but also with visualizations. Slide. For this practice, I have heard my teacher say many times, don't be stingy. Stinginess can be related to material things like offerings for song, but it can also be so many other things in our daily life, like lack of time, patience, or presence. I think about this often when I paint. What is a stingy painting? A stingy painting first lacks presence. There's a distractedness. The brushstrokes are flat and unfelt. There's no touch. The equivalent when someone says, yeah, on the phone, and you can tell they're just trying to get you off the line. There's a shallowness of feel. The opposite of this is a fullness of presence, an attentiveness to every inch of the picture plane. In college, one of my professors told me, you know, when you're painting, you have to love every part of the painting the same. You have to love painting the model as much as you love painting the chair or the wall. This is what makes a great painting. It's true. Is the artist present with you? Are they listening to you, receptive, responding to what you express? Or are they just there, shut off, lost in their thoughts and just waiting for their turn to speak? I believe it's the same for paintings. And if we develop a sensitivity, we can feel this from works of art when we sit with them, which is why I believe we have a responsibility as artists to develop this presence and generosity of spirit so that this can come through our work as an offering to the viewer and all beings. Slide, please. Before I started prolonged work on the sky paintings, I used to think that when I made art, each piece should be completely different from the one that preceded it. I had some idea that for something to be creative, it should have some element that distinguishes it clearly from the last piece. The more different the palette and form and structure, the better. I'm still very much interested in challenging myself and in growth, but I no longer subscribe to that level of needed variety. Working on continuous prolonged series has helped me change my perspective on this. Slide, please. For the last couple of years, I've been fortunate to travel with my teacher, Bakatoka Rinpoche, throughout New Mexico, California, and Pamako. Rinpoche is extraordinary in many ways. One of his main activities is writing the mani, the mantra of Chinrezig, on stones and rocks collected from around the globe. He will tirelessly write the mani for hours every day. The level of dedication to this compassionate act and the relaxed single-pointed focus with which he effortlessly writes the six-syllable mantra has had an incalculable effect on my mind. Rinpoche has kindly allowed me to carve his mani stones, and when we travel together, I try to do this as much as possible. Slide. Bakatoka Rinpoche was Dudjom Rinpoche's personal secretary for 7 years, and afterwards spent many years with Chacho Rinpoche transcribing precious pages at Rinpoche's request. I've heard Rinpoche humbly say, "They kept me because they liked my hand." To further illustrate Rinpoche's calligraphic mastery and the esteem many other masters hold him in, Pena Rinpoche asked Bakatoka Rinpoche to teach all of the tokus at Namdrolling calligraphy for many years. Slide, please. As someone who always strived to paint something new or fresh or constantly invent new visual languages, it might seem strange or counterintuitive to spend hundreds of hours carving the same 6 syllables on hundreds of stones. But there is a different freedom that arises from this act. One needs to cultivate an intense concentration as well as have a relaxed mind when carving this most sacred of mantras. When one is using a 175-watt Dremel tool to carve precise lines of one's teacher's calligraphy, one cannot make a mistake. Another interesting aspect of this is after every mani stone is finished, carved, and painted, I present it to Rinpoche. Slide, please. He has to approve each one. This could just be my projection, but it seems that when I show these to Rinpoche, Rinpoche isn't just seeing how they physically look, but is seeing where my mind was when I was carving them. This type of practice has helped me become less distracted and more mindful. If one has faith and belief in the 6-syllable mantra, then one sees it as inseparable from Chinrezig and the compassionate mind of enlightenment. When the mantra is written on a stone, earth and minerals are transformed into enlightened speech. I often like to think of the time span of these stones. Rocks that we come across on the surface of the earth can vary in age from less than 1 million years to 3 billion years old. That is extraordinary. Slide, please. Once a stone becomes a mani, that blessing goes beyond all time and space, going back to every single moment of that rock's millions of years of formation. I like to think about how every being, every microorganism, dinosaur, human that touched it, swam next to it, or even just saw this stone instantly becomes enlightened. Rinpoche has stones collected from all his travels and all over the world. Slide, please. In addition to seeing the blessing of the mani going back to every stage of its formation, I also like to see it going to every place it has traveled and lived over these millions of years. When I envision this and I see the mani wall that Rinpoche is building in Tularosa, New Mexico, with stones from all time and all over, it is very easy to envision the blessings of Chinrezig permeating literally throughout all time and space. The mani wall with its thousands of stones literally becomes Chinrezig and the locus of an interdependent web of blessing that showers all beings throughout time. Rinpoche's mani project is extraordinary because it's not just about the act of carving and painting, but also about finding the stones. An integral part of the process is always being on the lookout for those beautiful, perfect, smooth rocks. Slide. Part of the process is walking down rivers and sidewalks and attuning to the environment, feeling your feet, opening your eyes, and responding to the place. All aspects of the process can open one's intuition, awareness, and concentration. There's a different connection to the place and the land and all the beings that reside there through this deepening sensitivity. Some rocks just feel right. This also all becomes a form of offering. I can never drive by a river or see rocks and not think of my teacher or offer them to him in my mind. Rinpoche has told me to continuously carve the mani to purify the obscurations of my body, speech, and mind. The more I do this, it seems the more it benefits my art practice and other bodies of work. Some could say that carving the mani is one of the least creative of acts, but interestingly enough, the more I do it and the more focused my concentration and devotion become, the more effortless the creative flow from my land paintings and sky paintings becomes. Slide, please. Working within limited constraints can lead to limitless vistas. Through looking at and painting the sky again and again, I've been able to move away from an object and enter into a contemplation on luminosity, which is the ever-changing kaleidoscopic display of the 5 colors and their interdependence. Paul Valery said, "To see is to forget the name of the thing one sees." He said that so perfectly, and that is my aspiration for all of these series. In a way, maybe my understanding of freedom was a form of an escape, that pieces had to be new or different, things had to be reinvented. If there was a consistency, then that implied a stuckness. Now, as I continue with these bodies of work and projects, I see that real freedom is being able to look at the same thing and see it with fresh eyes every time, to pursue the freshness in the same subject. The more I do this, the more I experientially know that it is always new, it is always exciting, it is always fresh. Slide, please. One doesn't have to reinvent anything. One just has to really see what one is looking at, fresh, alive, spontaneous. That experience will permeate the brush and the color and the picture plane. That is what excites me. That is when I feel alive, when I feel like I'm not wasting time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wendelin or Shreeti, would you like to ask some questions?
Shreeti, do you have something you want to ask?
Yes, I do. Do you as well? Do you want to
I
go
do.
first?
Please go first.
Do you want to go first?
No, you may.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Peter. That was really fascinating. I was really interested specifically in your sky paintings. And I was wondering, when you're exploring the sky, how long do you sit there and explore before you put it in your canvas, or do you do it simultaneously? And following that question, I'm also interested to know how do you feel about the relationship between the clouds that have form and the spaciousness that is formless? So yeah.
Thank you for those great questions. Yeah, it's hard to talk about the sky paintings in general because it's always fresh, it's always different. So sometimes I'll just go out there and paint immediately, sometimes I'll wait. Sometimes I'll start actually in like a probably distracted state of mind and maybe something opens up, or vice versa. But I feel a lot of times the best paintings are the ones that happen kind of immediately and that are really fresh. And like another professor in college, he always used to tell me, he said, just do the next right thing. He's like, painting's easy, just do the next right thing. So I feel like if I'm in a really open, kind of receptive state of mind where there's a certain level of undistractedness or focus, like it's easy to do the next right thing maybe, or something like that, or it just flows, or I'm not thinking about it. It's just kind of responding and it's just happening. With the clouds as forms, I don't really see them like that. I don't really see them as forms. But it's interesting, when I was a kid, I used to love that. I used to actually I have sketchbooks that I would sit just drawing the clouds. But now, I guess I paint them sometimes, but I think I see it more as like color interaction or light or something. Thank you. Thank you.
Wendelin?
Hi, Peter. Thanks so much for your talk. I really enjoyed that. You talked a little bit about the relationship of the paintings. You said at first you were just doing each one as a individual thing, and this really interested me because you were also doing it as actually one whole series, repetition, painting again and again the same thing. So actually, you already had a good relationship set up there. But I loved, and I'd love to hear the relationship you feel between the sky and the land, the cloud forms and what you then see appearing in the land.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I think the thing that I see that bridges them the most is like my painting process. Like I wasn't able to talk about some of the, like I put it in my paper, but like some of the process of painting the land, I will start by painting a sky from direct observation. And then I will kind of do these kind of ribbon-like calligraphic strokes, and then I'll mask them, and then do another kind of ribbon stroke and then mask them, and keep on building like this, and then I'll paint another sky. And then I will kind of reveal all of the mask, and this kind of jumble will emerge, but then all of these other forms will be in that. So I think how I see them as being similar is that I like them to just spontaneously arise on their own without my planning or my kind of premeditated ideas. And that's also how I like to respond to the sky when I'm painting it. I really am not trying to figure it out. Maybe something like that. I hope that answers the question. That's what just came out.
Yeah, and I loved that I saw in one of your very early cloud paintings the same form of the cloud then later appeared in the land, and that was really nice to see the same form appear.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, it was really hard for me to show those paintings because I think they're awful, but this is like a conference on Buddhism, so humility is important, I think. But it's interesting that you saw that form arise another time.
Yeah, it's. I feel my feeling is that these are some of your best paintings.
Wow.
Because you really have shed something that is deep for you. It's not easy to take first steps. And those first steps are like when we're a little child and we're drawing. Actually, that's when we're most free, isn't it? And nobody's saying to us, that's no good, or that's this is no good, that's not good. You're just drawing, and when you're a child, you love it all. You love the experience. You don't worry about whether it's good or bad. You just go, oh, I'm going to draw that. Sure. So I love from that perspective.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm never scared of trying something new or jumping head first. I don't think there's any failure in painting necessarily, but I don't think those paintings are free. Actually, I think they're pretty stuck. But I do appreciate your generosity. But one interesting thing about the forms, like one of my favorite painters is Willem de Kooning, and he would do this really interesting thing where he would cut out forms and then kind of rearrange them on the canvas, and they would constantly arise throughout the years. I don't know, maybe there's something there, but thank you.
One more thing, it's just a reflection for you very quickly. When you were talking, the thing that came into my mind was a gardener that I worked with when I was, I also paint botanical paintings as part of Himalayan medicine. And he said to me once, when you're painting, when you're displaying a flower, for a show, he said, the thing is you can't have the room too hot, because if the room's too hot, the flower blooms, it helps the flower to bloom, but actually it blooms and then it starts dropping its petals very quickly. And if you have the room very, very cold, then it doesn't actually bloom. So having a warm room, you allow the blossom to open, and then as it's opened, it's able to sustain for longer for people to see it at the show. Then if it's the room is too warm. That experience just came into my mind while you were talking about the land, I think. So I thought I would share it with you.
Next show, there'll be no AC. Okay, thank you for that.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. So we're coming to the break now. Welcome back online. I hope you had a good rest. now we will continue. We have one more talk, but before we talk about the talk and introduce our next speaker, I would like to invite everybody either online or in the room to write their comments. And this will be done in the room in this little book. So please write your email if you have any comments, any suggestions for workshops, for future conferences, ideas, appreciations, so that we can actually kind of gather the energy that we've built over this conference and ride on it, surf on it, and maybe make the wave even bigger and create a tsunami of wisdom that would make the universe filled with auspiciousness. Let's try that. So ideas, comments, wishes, dedications, whatever you wish. So for our next speaker, we have Shreeti Pradhan. I'm very proud to bring her into the discussion. She started by embodying Tara at the very beginning of our conference, and she will be the last speaker. I think it's quite auspicious. I hadn't thought about it that way, but this is how it's happening. So it may be the blessing of Tara altogether. So Shreeti Pradhan is a student of Caryā Nṛtya, a meditative Buddhist dance form native to Kathmandu Valley, and a devoted art practitioner inspired by contemplative practices. Shreeti's perspective of contemplative art is deeply rooted in her experience as a student of Buddhism and Buddhist studies. Living amongst both lay and monastic Tibetans and Nṛtya Buddhist communities has further influenced her aesthetic vision. Shreeti is a trained clinical musical therapist and writes, composes, and performs as a solo artist, as well as a member of a collaborative music project called Udumbara. So if ever you hear that there is a show coming, you should check Udumbara. Please welcome with me, Shreeti Pradhan.
Thank you, Professor Diane, and thank you, everyone. Just gonna take a deep breath and then. Secrecy is a recurring theme in Buddhist Tantra. At the same time, many tantric practices contain performative elements like chanting, vocal melodies, instrumentation, hand gestures, and more. Dorjila, can I have a slide? Yeah, thank you. As an art practitioner, I'm naturally intrigued by this notion of secret or private performativity. If tantric practice is private and yet contains performative elements, for whom and for what purpose are these private performances performed? In my art project, I contemplate some of these very questions by exploring secrecy and non-conceptuality through the Nṛtya Buddhist dance form called Caryā Nṛtya. However, unlike many traditional forms of dance, which are often performed in public or for particular audiences, Caryā Nṛtya is a tantric Buddhist sadhana or meditative practice that is often kept private. As anyone who has encountered the famous double slit experiment in quantum physics will know, the very act of adding an observer or audience can drastically change the dynamic of a particular phenomenon. Therefore, by utilizing Caryā Nṛtya practice to experiment with the boundaries between public and private and other related themes like form and formlessness and presence and absence, I hope to better understand, both conceptually and experientially, the role of secrecy in tantric Buddhist practice. In that regard, this paper is a written companion to what is otherwise an embodied and experiential art project. As such, in this presentation and in the associated project, I am more interested in exploring questions through embodied experience and art practice than in producing nuggets of so-called conceptual truth. Still, I will discuss some general observations in the concluding section of this presentation. Next slide. While I do not claim to be a historian, and while I'm well aware of our present time constraints, I do feel it is necessary to provide a brief history of Caryā Nṛtya. Caryā Nṛtya, literally meaning something like dance or Nṛtya, based on the esoteric conduct or Caryā of the Buddhist tantras, is a meditative dance form preserved by the Newar community native to the Kathmandu Valley. In it, the dancer uses mental meditation, vocal singing, and embodied dance to unite their body, speech, and mind with that of a meditational deity. In other words, to become the deity in body, speech, and mind. It is closely connected with the well-known tradition of Caryā Giti, often loosely translated as songs of realization, associated with the Buddhist Mahasiddhas. Newar masters of Caryā Nṛtya often cite the He Vajratantra as one of the main scriptural sources of this enigmatic dance tradition. While many Caryā Nṛtya dances remain secret or private to this day, it is important to acknowledge that public exhibitions of certain Caryā Nṛtya dances are becoming increasingly common at cultural events throughout Nepal and even abroad. However, most of the dances performed publicly are based on more widely known exoteric deities. For instance, the dance I performed at the inauguration of this conference was that of Green Tara, an exoteric deity who can be displayed publicly. Next slide, please. My methodology. In my project, I was inspired by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche's notion of Dharma art. As we learned yesterday through Shireen Patel's presentation, Trungpa Rinpoche says that, quote, Dharma art refers to art that springs from a certain state of mind on the part of the artist that could be called the meditative state. It is an attitude of directness and unself-consciousness in one's creative work, unquote. Trungpa Rinpoche's notion of Dharma art struck me as a useful methodology in my exploration of tantric secrecy because of its emphasis on self-consciousness, as more broadly, non-conceptuality. On the topic of secrecy and privacy in Tantric Buddhism, one of my gurus explained that keeping our practice private helps to create a non-judgmental, carefree, and non-conceptual space in which experiences can flow organically. Similarly, Trungpa Rinpoche states that his Dharma art method helps one to, quote, appreciate the nature of things as they are and to express it without any struggle of thoughts and fears, unquote. Another important theme in my methodology is the notion of journaling, of recording traces of the divine. Through journaling, traces of a secret dance can be displayed publicly while keeping the actual dance itself private. Coming to a description of my project, combining Trungpa Rinpoche's approach to Dharma art with this practice of journaling, I set out to develop an experiential and experimental art project that utilizes Caryā Nṛtya dance to explore the relationships between secrecy, privateness, and publicness in Tantric Buddhist practice. I settled on the medium of footprints. Next slide, please. By journaling a particular Caryā Nṛtya dance in the form of footprints on a canvas, the canvas bearing the traces of the deity, or to be specific, the footprints I created while dancing as the deity, can be displayed publicly while the actual dance itself remains private. This also connects to related themes like form and formlessness and presence and absence, in that the traces that form and have the traces take form and have presence, while the deified dancer who produced them remains formless and absent. The deity whose Caryā Nṛtya dance I chose to perform is called Chinnamasta Devi, meaning the goddess whose head is severed, also known as Chinnamunda or Trikaya Vajra Yogini. She is a wrathful female meditational deity who originated in Tantric Buddhism, but was later also adopted into the Hindu tradition of the 10 wisdom goddesses, or Dasha Mahavidya. In both traditions, she is visualized as standing naked in a charnel ground, holding her own severed head aloft in her hand, while that very head drinks the vital fluids spouting from her own severed neck. I chose to work with this deity for 2 reasons. First, she has a deep significance in my own personal life and practice. Second, some traditions consider her to be a secret deity, while others consider her to be public. Therefore, given her hybrid nature as a private and public goddess, revered by both Buddhists and Hindus, she struck me as the perfect deity to embody in my artistic exploration of privateness and publicness. Buddhist ritual manuals devoted to Chinnamasta, like those attributed to the Siddhas Lakshmankara and Virupa, describe her mandala as consisting of a square base, with a white lotus surmounted by a circular sun disk upon which rests a vermilion-colored tharmodaya, or sacred triangle, representing the female reproductive organ as the source of all phenomena. Next slide. For that reason, I started with a square canvas, 4 feet by 4 feet in size, symbolizing the square mandala base. I covered that canvas with a yellow base coat symbolizing the earth element. Upon that, I painted a white layer to symbolize the white lotus. Next slide. Within that, I painted an orange circle symbolizing the sun disk, surmounted by a vermilion-colored triangle symbolizing the Dharmodaya. For the footprints, I covered my feet in red pigment. The red is reminiscent of the red alaha worn throughout classical South Asian dance traditions. Red also has special significance in the Tantric Buddhist tradition, where it symbolizes rajas, or menstrual blood, the sacred feminine vital fluid that is associated with innate wisdom. Playing with the notions of menstruation and publicness is a secondary object of my project. Conversely, the square white layer of paint symbolizes bodhicitta, or semen, the sacred masculine vital fluid that is associated with skillful method. Just as my Tantric Buddhist yogas seek to unify these sacred feminine and sacred masculine energies within the practitioner's own body, my art project similarly attempts to unite these 2 symbolic elements. Next slide. Coming to conclusion. One theme that continually arose in my mind as I engaged with this project was the interplay of conceptuality and non-conceptuality. On one hand, keeping my dance sadhana private helped me to create a safe space in which concepts and value judgments like correct versus incorrect, right versus wrong, etc., were less imposing. Whereas when I contemplated the aspects of my project that is displayed publicly or will be displayed publicly, my conceptual mind was full of hopes and fears. However, it would be overly simplified to state that privateness always fosters non-conceptuality, while publicness always creates concepts. Even while performing the private aspects of my dance, I became increasingly aware of another dance taking place, the ever-present dance between conceptuality and non-conceptuality. For example, after practicing the dance steps and gestures repeatedly over a long period of time, many of these movements became so familiar that I did not have to engage my conceptual mind to perform them. The process was much more experiential and embodied, but at the same time, I found that the accompanying song lyrics, which described the goddess being embodied, engaged my conceptual mind and shaped my perception of that deity. At first, I was disappointed in this proliferation of conceptual thoughts, but eventually I came to see a certain sort of harmony and balance in this skillful union of both conceptuality and non-conceptuality. This appreciation for the interplay of conceptuality and non-conceptuality that I was able to cultivate in private also helped me to better appreciate the same phenomenon in the public aspects of my project. To put it another way, by recognizing that the private elements were not strictly non-conceptual and that concepts proliferate even in private, it also helped me to recognize that the public elements are not strictly conceptual and that non-conceptuality can manifest even in public spaces. This helped me to challenge my assumptions and expand my own boundaries. Ironically, as I became more aware of this interplay, this ever-present dance between conceptuality and non-conceptuality, even the very distinction between privateness and publicness began to blur. Next slide. Thank you.
Oh, some questions from the panel. I don't know if Wendelin, but already Peter has one.
Thank you very much for that. It was really inspiring. And I think your piece downstairs is also very beautiful. And it's interesting because when you're looking at it, I mean, I can't help but kind of visualize some dance just by seeing the movement. And so it always remains a mystery, but you see that there, which is really striking. But I was also wondering, like, if you can speak to it, if not, I understand, but in like maybe a more esoteric ritual setting, if this is done in a temple, there still has to be maybe footprints on the ground, yes? Or not so much?
No, this is an experimental, art that I tried to, kind of have the traces of the deity, but this is not in the culture or yes.
So no other footprints would be left in other settings? Okay.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Wendelin, you have a question for Shreeti?
Oh, yeah, there's a few things in my mind, but I'm not entirely sure what's going to arise, really. Thank you very much, Shreeti, for sharing your process. And I think it was nice to see how clear each stage of your process worked. Part of me wants to ask about the paint that you're using and what type of paint it is. And another aspect which is coming into my mind is the direction of movement that you used. I think because I know you and Peter have both read my paper, I talked about my research process where I always start at the end of my book, like a bit like, Chinese books start at the back. And I wondered about whether you had a direction of movement like that.
Thank you. For the type of paint, I used acrylic. And also because acrylic dries up pretty fast. So to make it last longer, I used a retarder for the red acrylic so that when I was dancing for 4 minutes or so, it would still remain. Could you please kindly rephrase your second question? I'm not sure if I understand.
When you're producing your painting, the direction that you were moving in order to make this, was there any particular direction that you felt the movement led you, or was it entirely prescribed by the dance?
So in Caryā Nṛtya, we have a certain steps that we follow. We have mudras and we have footsteps. So mostly all charyas is going to have, charya dances are going to have similar patterns of feet movement. So that is what I followed. Apart from mudras being different, and maybe sometimes some circular movement, or if there is an, like explanation of, like, let's say if there's bhaya in the Charya Giti, or which is like fear, or let's say courage or something like that, then there might be a few different steps apart from the repetitive ones, but usually the steps are quite repetitive in Caryā Nṛtya.
Thank you.
I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for these great presentations and bringing in this kind of discussion into the academia, practice-oriented research. This is kind of a novel thing happening now here and there. So now I will read you what I had prepared, but somehow things shifted. And so I'm a little bit like Daniel this morning. I'm not sure how it's going to go, but bear with me. So contemplative practices are not so much destined to represent or produce something, but destined to work as a mirror for one's living experience. This is partly why and how it could contribute to facing today's challenges. The aesthetic of such practice implies a close link to wisdom, often fostered through textual studies, and the experience of beauty also. Beauty in this context, to follow up after our discussion yesterday, is not something created, but an experience stripped of pretense, stripped of overlay, and or even stripped of denial. Denial could be defined here as our failing to see what is there just as it is. So an artistic practice implies learning to rest with the stark sense of living experience, stark honesty, an organic experience where body and mind are neither two nor one, where past and future can only be seen through the continuous present without end. Beauty is found in the starkness as well as the fullness of ungraspable reality. Hence, an artistic practice, whether it is performative, in the case of Shreeti, pictorial with such a form as Tara in the case of Wendelin or Chinnamunda by Shreeti, or without form like the sky in the case of Peter. Such practices have the potential to reveal the key to wakefulness. And this is so for the artist practicing as much as for the audience, who may be receptive to seeing. This approach is closely linked to the breath, to the impermanence of the moment. Breath is understood here in the sense of the subtle and vital, but invisible movement of body-mind. So we could think of long prana, or I think in Chinese it's called san qi, but I'm not sure how to pronounce it correctly. Because this panel is practice-based in essence, it is relevant to the Buddhist brilliant pairing of opposites, as Shreeti well presents it. Wisdom is present at all time, inherent to all beings, experiential by nature, yet the embodying of it develops with training. It is here, yet it is there, yet not seen. The development of it, an act of unveiling. Art in this context is an expression, an embodiment, or at least an embracing of such fundamental wisdom. And the art practice itself is therefore necessarily contemplative, as it flirts with immanence and speak from and to experience. Essential to this fundamental wisdom is the notion of emptiness. talking about sacredness in these Buddhist contexts as referred by Wendelin and by Shreeti means just that. The ability to embrace the bewildering effect of appearance and emptiness inseparable. A painting, a dance, an artist is not sacred in and of itself. Everything experienced can be sacred, sealed by the seal of wisdom. In the case of Wendelin, and here this is a little bit, I'm bringing you into her earlier paper rather than her presentation, and maybe she could bring us a little more into that journey, but giving you a little bit of window onto that. Her presentation, or here her paper, is weaved as a mystery novel throughout a very intuitive narrative moving from historical data to landscape and personal events. We as audience, or I in that case, was drawn to find out if the hat of the monk in the corner was actually yellow or red, whitewash with a red rim, and to what in the end it could refer to. In the case of Peter, we sense the teaching, the gazing, though through what he calls painting Nundro, a kind of prostration, a Vajrasattva recitation, a mandala offering of Guru Yoga wrapped into one, open space. All these activities into one, a sincerely very inspiring proposition. To emulate the idea that everything arises through space or emptiness and actually paint the sky before earthly manifestation. What a wonderful way of contemplating some of the Prajnaparamita literature content. That emptiness is the mother of all Buddhas, of all things, the grandmother of all, the ancestor of all ancestors. This is not without reason. Emptiness precedes any creative process, any construction, any perception. From open space comes a realm of possibilities, a realm of manifestation. Presumptions about the yellow hats can be revealed if space in the mind allows it to be revealed. For Shreeti, she's been blooming throughout this semester, I can attest to that, while writing her BA dissertation. She brings us, not unlike Wendelin, into her journey with deity practice, where the role of secrecy is always somewhat paradoxical. How wonderful that she brings that to our table for discussion. At the root of our contemplative art practice is a specific understanding of the world and its inhabitants, a specific relationship of beings to their natural world. Beings and the worlds are said to be neither the same nor different, neither two nor one. So the sky, the desert, the mountains, the caves, the city, the stage, the audience, or the traces left by the presence of the deity. Whatever the case may be, the use of paradoxical language or logic of joining the pairs of opposite necessarily points to the ineffability of experience, non-conceptuality, the reality of our commonly shared humanity. The body itself is an inexpressible conversation of element and forces. The colors on canvas, the nature of the light, the visualizing of a deity. Vivid experience is empty of all conceptual overlay. Empty it is, as it goes beyond words and thoughts, and full, as it relates to what animates every living being. And I would ask Wendelin a few questions. I was wondering if, in many ways, in your presentation, especially the one that you wrote, if you would think that research and artistic consideration, how would I word that? I would word that differently. So let me go back a little bit. Erase that. So now we're starting again.
That's okay.
So my idea here is that in many ways, research is an artistic process. We have questions and we have to find out things and somehow resolve problems. We have to observe, we have to reflect. And so I would like you at some point to tell us about the relationship of research and your artistic process. And I even thought that in some way we could perhaps make a connection between view in connection to research, meditation in connection to artistic practice, and conduct as you are a mother. So it's almost like joining a triad that we have in Buddhism, and that seems to all cooperate in your presentation, at least in your paper. So artistic practice is a way, if I continue, to explore the plenitude of emptiness and to bring to life one's developing wisdom breath. Artistic practice is operative. So I'd like in some way, Shreeti, all of you three, to think about this. So how is it operative? Does it change your experience? Is it a way to live, to see, to taste, to hear, to feel, to smell, to do research, to write plays in connection with earlier production, to write poetry, to preserve visual treasures, or embrace pure realms? So how do you see these two relating? And all of our speakers today, Wendelin, Peter, and Shreeti, remind us that the artistic journey necessarily implies the sensory faculties. These are doors of and to our living experience, and in fact, it is only through them that one finds the actual concrete reality, even in a dream. But what is strikingly astonishing is that, so central as it is, this notion is often not studied in a concrete and practical way. And so the question is not so much why, but how can we do this? And I think the art course was about that. And we are really working here at Rangjung Yeshe Institute to find pedagogical ways to bring this kind of understanding into an embodied way. So if you have some thoughts about that, our artistic practice is actually a way to embody the teachings of the Buddha, the studies that you are doing either in a traditional form or in academic forms. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Wow, Diane, thank you so much for that exposition. I really appreciate that. You mentioned the difference between my written paper and my presentation. And I absolutely loved the fact that you read it like a mystery novel. That's a really wonderful. That's definitely the feeling. And in fact, I had not thought that, but my husband, who spent many years working in Dunhuang with the materials, the textual materials, he is in the middle of writing a mystery novel set in Dunhuang. But he doesn't let me read it. Not yet. But the end quote that I put up, I feel has a good sense of what you were talking about, because it says if the even if the Buddha isn't present at the time, you know, that one still has the ability to receive the teachings from the sky or from rock, or sorry, this is my cat's, one of my cat's tails is here, or this type of thing. And it somewhat harks back to this question of secrecy, because the subtle, I think of it more as subtlety than secrecy. And so in my method, my primary method is, it's described in different ways in different traditions, but it's quite straightforwardly described in the Chan tradition, where they call it the method of no method. It's incredibly challenging to undertake that method within academic context. And yet through the process of doing this work, I have entirely found it revealing itself. The connection that you, and I will come back to the hats in a moment, if I may. The connection of the mother and the artist and the researcher is like an endless fountain, I think, because it's one, as in the practice, I don't feel any separation from my research, from my practice as a mother. My children are wonderful in the way that they feed into my research, and their insights being very, very pure in the way children's insights are, you know, the questions that they ask, or the offerings that they give. And from the perspective of artist, well, even for the process of, for example, making the paint and grinding the stones using different types of stone, for example, lapis lazuli, having to, my youngest daughter, who's 9, she grinds this particular one for me, and really enjoys it. But you have to be very careful with lapis, because like many other stones, when you're making paint, if you grind it too much, actually it goes white, so you lose all the color. So you have to only grind to a certain level of fineness, you know, refining. And so the mother and the artist and the researcher are all one. In returning to the hats very quickly, the process of understanding the hats is really a spiritual act, I guess. And when I finally came to the point of the grid reconstructing, it was entirely spontaneous. So I was not seeking to reconstruct the grid. I was simply doing a little bit of reading through, I think possibly even boredom with something else, and I picked up another book. I opened the book because it has the beautiful wall paintings of my dear friend Lama Rinchen in the Karma Kagyu tradition. And I opened and began to read the second Karmapa hagiography. And as I did so, because my practice usually involves either, I'm ambidextrous, so I use either left or right hand for either painting, drawing, or sketching. And at this point, I was just picked up a pencil unmindedly and was drawing as I was reading. And as I read, unexpectedly, the grid began to appear. And as I was, the grid was appearing, I wasn't even aware that it was the grid appearing. I was just doing whatever. And as I read, I became to realize that what I was reading was actually part of the Tara and the 8 Fears practice, which I had not expected. It was just a page I'd opened. And so this is the method of no method. But to be able to articulate this is a challenge.
Thank you. Thank you. Just for the audience, the question of the hat was yellow and often associated with the Gelugpa tradition, although the Gelugpa tradition was not yet founded. So that was the kind of history.
But
So
this comes from the Dunhuang studies, because the Dunhuang studies, the material from the library cave, you find things that are that point of emergence. Everything is just emerging at that point. And this is the beauty of the material.
Thank you. Thank you. We have to kind of invite Shreeti and Peter to respond to some of the questions or their thoughts, and then we will open to all right, so we'll see. Right.
So there was a question about the kind of our practice and Buddhist practice and the kind of connection, or
research, the side of research and the side of art in that case, and also I would say basically daily life all melted into one, and how they all influence one another.
For me, I think they all influence one another, and the benefit of it is like a sense of wonder and joy and enthusiasm, because all of those things help me see things in a more kind of maybe fresh way, or help me look at something and not really see it as an object. A lot of that has to do probably more with painting than research, in the sense of training myself, like from painting from observation when I was younger, like in art school, of like, how do you mix that color? Like what color is next to this color, next to this? So I'm not really seeing it as a mat on a mat. It's more like color next to another color. So it kind of opens things up. And that helps me kind of dissect things and maybe see them more open. It also always, I don't know. Yeah, I think these things kind of help me always have a sense of wonder around me where I don't really know what it is. So it's a sense of discovery. And I think, I mean, especially like Dodro Rinpoche and Longchenpa, those texts also make me feel that way too. If that answers the question.
Thank you. Thank you. So we will open to the floor. I would say we would have questions from the room here, one, and then go to online, and then go back and forth like this. So if online you have a question, please lift up your yellow hand, and we'll take the first one from here. Is there any question? Yes, please.
Hello. Okay, thank you all. This was really a wonderful concluding panel. So what I was thinking, Shreeti, in the end, it's very moving the way you were talking about your process. I felt really like you were profoundly sharing yourself with us. And so I feel that kind of act of generosity, I just want to mark my appreciation, my gratitude for that. And so I think that kind of generosity could imbue all of our acts of research, actually. Because I think one thing, since Rinpoche is always urging us to be scholar practitioners, I kind of want to make sure that we're not, you know, in Diane, when your poignant questions in the end about like pedagogy and how we can embody, and I don't want us to just think that research is something that is dry and that is not alive and that is not fresh, because I think that it's all about mindset, actually. Like everything that we do, whether it's research or something else, can take on this kind of vital, can be kind of vital and generous and fresh. But also, so Shreeti, at the end, when you were talking about how you discovered, like the process allowed you to discover the dance between conceptuality and non-conceptuality. I think what I was thinking about, because Trungpa Rinpoche has been so present throughout this whole conference, I feel. And so one thing that Rinpoche teaches, even though I'd never met him, I count him as one of my teachers. He really had a beautiful way of saying like that this wisdom is, you don't have to be on the pure bhumis or a Buddha to somehow discover it. But something that was very surprising in his tantric teachings was he says that I'm shifting your vocab a little bit from conceptual, non-conceptual to, because Rinpoche talked about non-dualism and duality. And he said that realizing the non-dual wisdom, like that is not actually the end of the journey, so to speak, but then one revisits duality. One can actually encounter duality from a non-dual perspective. So I thought about that actually listening to both Shreeti and Peter. And I wonder if that speaks to you at all, the way that submitting yourself to the openness of something like non-duality then allows you to visit or play with duality of your art making. Or yeah, so I guess I just didn't know if that spoke to, that's what I thought of when I heard you both.
Thank you, Shireen. I'm in no place to word what non-duality would mean. I don't know. All I can say is that while I was in the dance on the mandala that I created on a canvas, at that moment, as much as I was in the, I was, kind of just lost in the dance, in a way, probably, I don't know how to say this. I just don't have word. I think it's just, probably I would say I would invite all of us to maybe just have a look at the piece again and explore and experience what you see. And yeah, I don't know how to talk about this, but yeah, I invite you all to have a look at the piece again and take time with it. Yeah.
So is there a question from, yes, Diane Butler? I see you with a hand up. Please.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, from Indonesia.
Yes, I'm here on Bali, and I'm sorry I can't turn on the camera and ask the question at the same time. Otherwise, I can't read the question. Is it okay?
Yes, it's perfect.
So I'll put my hand down and just say thank you so much. It's really a great honor to be here, and I wish I could have been there for more of your offerings, Diane, and from the Institute there. My name is Diane Butler. I'm a longtime friend of Diane since way back in the days when she came from Montreal to Colorado, where I was at Nṛtya Institute, now called University. So I'll just speak briefly that I've enjoyed sharing with your institute a few times about this question about contemplative practice in art. And as somebody who's Buddhist, but identifies more, you could say, with the Sangha of the world, not a specific Sangha. And I just wanted to ask or just inquire a little bit, something that I think actually applies to all three speakers. And thank you so much, all three of you. Wendelin, Dr. Wendelin, and also Shreeti, and I'm sorry, I forgot the other man's name.
Peter.
Yes. So I'm going to look up my question, which I put in the chat box, sorry. It has to do with this question about spatiality. I don't mean special, I mean spatiality. So I noticed, Dr. Wendelin, that you have interested in pilgrimage and also in grid. My background is I'm really a dancer. I went to Juilliard, and we of course study a lot about moving through space and also about where we are spatially speaking on the grid. And then I wondered, as somebody who struggled as a dancer to learn language so that I could obtain a PhD and could talk about things that were difficult to describe, about feelings of religiosity and art, or why those are important in terms of intercultural dialogue and so forth. I wondered if you'd actually looked at any of the scholarly work in the field of what I think is called astroarchaeology. I can't speak English. Sorry, that was hard. I said that almost in Indonesian. Astroarchaeology. I think that's English. And it's something I came to contact because a friend of mine who passed away a few years ago, his name is Suprapto Suryadarmo. He often practiced at a small temple called Kalasan in central Java, and it's actually devoted to Tara. And so from there, I started to understand that there was this whole idea about mapping in the sky, how the star constellations are related to sites on the earth. It made it very grounded. It wasn't like a mystical thing. It was a very physical science that I think people 1,000 years ago or longer had great adeptness in, including in places in Mexico and so forth, of reading the sky, you could say, mapping the sky and mapping the earth, and feeling the relationship of the human as a part of that, just a part of it. It's not like a centralized mandala, pardon me, of Tara in the middle or human beings in the middle. And sorry, let me go just a little further. I know it's blabbery.
No, not at all.
So here in Indonesia, they've actually had quite a lot of lively discussions about Tara, and also, you know, people back in the 1990s talking about ways that Tara was disguised in other goddess figures or female figures in Indonesian mythology and so forth. A lot of, I mean, I'm not a scholar like that, but I've loved reading them. But what I love about it is this notion that she was a guide, whether it happens or not. But I just loved this notion that she was a guide, and that when the ship, you know, the ship with, it had a group of people, not an individual. So it wasn't like about individual enlightenment. It was a ship of pilgrims, religious pilgrims and merchants, traders. And they were from different parts of the earth, they say, and perhaps even Atisha, who happened to have spent time in Nalanda. And then somebody said, you need to go. And he prayed, it says. I mean, I love these folklores because I just think they're so rich with meaning for our lives these days. So he took the stormy journey, and it says that maybe he came to the shore of Sumatra, maybe. And there are archaeologists who have done a lot of pretty deep research on that. And it says that it continues over land and that it's near the area of Candi Borobudur. And then came this question of Buddhism and the different ways it moves through the world, decentralizing Buddhist teachings, which I also adore. Like it's not a cultural property, Buddhism, of course. And then, you know, there's this temple, it honors her. There's a beautiful statue of her. You can come to Java sometime and see it.
Thank you very much.
And then also people
So,
tried to
sorry,
demonstrate
Diane?
about this flow, the flow.
Diane, would
So
you
that's-
ask a question?
So that the question is this question about the mapping being a larger mapping than an individual path, or you could say a culturally an individual cultural path. If you can speak to that a little bit, I would adore that. Sorry for blabbering so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate your question, and you've seen Tara very clearly. aspect of the relationship between the stars, the sky, and the land is very significant. And in fact, one of my colleagues at Bournemouth University, who is an archaeologist, works exactly on this matter. And it's quite a developing area of research. Also, in fact, if you want to look at the from many cultures, as you say, or, you know, there's the aspects of this celestial mapping in, for example, China. They've done very great detailed mapping of this, and the earliest maps we have, which are written down in the Buddhist context, come from the Dunhuang caves, and we have these celestial maps in this hidden cave. Also, interestingly, the earliest printed book in existence, which is the Diamond Sutra. And the Tara being disguised in different aspects, this is the subtlety. So it's very nice that you point that out. It's really greatly appreciated. And her as a guide, Tara and the 8 Fears, it encapsulates this capability of guidance that she has to offer. And when you had a look at the different Taras that I moved through very quickly, you will have seen the Tara who is the storm-colored Tara. And in fact, I don't think I showed it on my slides, but underneath each of the Taras, there's a little drawing, little painting of the obscuration that she deals with. And the obscuration of this particular Tara is water, which is attachment. And it shows a little ship. And the little ship is there, and it also shows a bridge. And because in the Thangka you also have the cure, you know, the thing that alleviates. And that's why on the Silk Road this particular Tara was very popular, because you had traveling merchants and people who were traveling. Anyone who travels, she is a very specific guide for this in terms of protection. And so these are the merchant traders. But also, I love the connection you've made to Indonesia, because this link with Atisha, because absolutely this practice has that connection. And being able to bring all of that together with the beauty of the dance and Tara as a dancer. This is really significant, because the moving from being a dancer into the context of the academic, which you talked about, to be able to bring dance into your practice and not to actually see it as separate in any way, enables the ability of scholarship. And we see this particularly in Sarasvati, of course, who is the white Tara who creates the longevity, but also through scholarship, through dance, through music, through the creation of art. So entirely encapsulated in her beauty. So that's a really lovely way. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have questions from the room. Thank you So good.
Hello. First of all, thank you so much for the great presentations. All the presentations are fascinating and very informative. So my question or the curiosity is, I'm kind of curious to know, as we have been talking about Dharma art, the sacred art, so forth. So I'm kind of curious to know how to see this sacred art, the sacredness of sacred art, and the ordinariness of ordinary art, the distinctions. And there was one beautiful distinctions made by Matthew Regard, Venerable Matthew Regard, in his book, The Monk and Philosopher. In his book, he explained the distinction between sacred art and ordinary art. He says the ordinary arts tries to create imagery world, and sacred art helps to penetrate into the nature of reality. And ordinary art, it's aimed at arousing passions, and sacred art aims at stilling them. So I found this distinction very kind of beautiful. And I'm wondering if you, as a scholar of art, Buddhist art, if you have found as such distinctions between the sacred art and ordinary art. If you, in your way to observe, if you find such distinction, how do you kind of find the distinctions? How do you observe such distinction?
Very, very nice question. Thank you so much. This is partly a question about the artist's eye. So when creating sacred art, having a very clear vision, a very pure vision is really important. And this goes alongside with a number of practices. So, for example, things like not enter the studio unless your fingernails, toenails, teeth, everything very clean. And when you enter the studio, always sweep the floor before you begin. So even maybe you can light some candles or offer some flowers. This type of thing is really important. You can do this in your general practice. It helps actually to purify the art. And in reality, your sacred art practice self-purifies. This purification process can be painful. So that's okay. But don't get too tied up in that. With creating ordinary art, as you say, when we're creating ordinary art, maybe it's more about trying to communicate with people our feeling of suffering or our feeling of joy in a very rougher way. So actually we can see they're not entirely separate. but one has sacred art, we have purified that. And to be able to work through the process of moving beyond, prajna paramita, we gate gate paragate parasangate bodhisvaha. We move beyond this conception of art. I hope that maybe answers a little bit. Please tell me if not.
Maybe we could hear from Shreeti and Peter. And then we'll open for the end of the conference, perhaps bring in last discussions after this. Yeah.
In my learning, I feel that sacredness arises from, let's say, when we're talking about art as being sacred, perhaps arises from a space of bodhicitta. And when we have that intention and motivation, what we call ordinary becomes sacred. I think that would be my answer.
That's exactly what I was going to say as well. But I also maybe will add to that, with Drupal Trungpa Rinpoche, one of the things he told me, and he's really extraordinary. If you don't know his paintings, I would really suggest looking them up. And if you ever get a chance to meet him, he's a real force. But he said something to the effect, he was really stressing the intention when you make the work. He's like, really be clear, why are you making this? If this is self-gratifying, or if this is to ultimately benefit all beings and to realize the nature of your mind to benefit all beings. And he's like, this is like the best place for paintings to come from. And he said many other things, but he also said something interesting. He's like, like in the West, a lot of painters, it's all about their suffering and their emotions. And a lot of this is self-gratifying or trying to get attention. And he's like, this is not the goal of art. He's like, the goal of art is to realize the nature of your mind, and the nature of your mind is not full of afflictive emotion. So I don't know, maybe something like that also.
So this is kind of something we could maybe even spend a whole conference on. But I'd like to kind of wrap up some of the main ideas, some of the main questions that were brought up. If you have some last thoughts or some insight that you'd like to share so that we can have this discussion, larger discussion, including everybody. I'm a little bit sad about Andrew not being here about this mapping of the sky, because there was a real leeway into the mapping discussion in there. And there are different discussions, like the grid of, at the beginning, we talked about with Julia, something very structured and spontaneity, and how do they work together? Are they really external to each other, or are they complementary to each other? So if you have anything that you'd like to kind of help us with to conclude, that would be really great. Yes, Renee.
As we're wrapping up this afternoon, just now, I was thinking about the extensive conversation that we were having yesterday about trying to define beauty. And there were many shared ideas about what is beauty and how do we understand it. And thinking of that, and then thinking of what Peter said in his talk about this sense of seeing, and that if I misunderstand you, Peter, you can correct me, but this understanding of the looking, the more the seeing, the more that his paintings developed and the colors came through the sky. And then really bringing it back into the sense, Diane, of the class, and from what I'm understanding, the sense of pure perception. And that all these papers and all these presentations and really all of our lives, because all of our work is being are representations of our lives, that it's all about seeing. It's about being in that present moment and capturing what is in front of us at any moment. So I really just appreciate everybody's capabilities of seeing so clearly in whatever form that it's manifested in. So thank you to everyone.
Yes, Danielle.
Thank you so much, everyone. Just a small thoughts. I really appreciated, Diane, you bringing up Shreeti's role in the beginning and the closing of the conference. That's wonderful. I also want to note that we've closed the discussion officially with this question of what makes practice, art as practice, what makes it sacred. That's exactly where we began. I'd like to remind everyone about Jerome Adu's answered that exact same question. At least that's how I understand it. He said, when is the art, when is the piece finished? It's finished, if I remember correctly, when you get out of the mind state of it being practiced. When you get out of the mind state of being in the moment and being fluid and not being kind of caught up in delusion and so forth. So we do have a few nice parallels, and along the way we've seen a lot of different, not competing, but I think complementing methods for creating or constructing or recognizing. So thank you, everyone.
I think, John, you had
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone who delivered today. And I just had one question for Shreeti. You described the piece that you generated, dancing and with paint, as experimental. And also, I wanted to just say, I thought that the way you analyzed the distinction between secret and public was very thoughtful and very interesting. I'm just wondering if maybe beyond a one-time experiment that you might, if not reproduce the same results, conduct the same experiment again.
Thank you, John. Yes, I had given it a thought, and I'm just so thankful for Dr. Diane and the whole team for giving me this opportunity to learn that I could experiment and explore through canvas and acrylic paints and dance on it. It was actually, I think it's started through this. So I hope I would love to take it forward and and see what those explorations bring, or what it feels like. So
I mean, I don't want to objectify it or reify it, but it could be a thing.
I think. Done.
I guess I'm landing back again, Diane, on your question about, or your thoughts like about research and pedagogy and this and that. And I think something that the conference is laying bare to me is that, research is not just the work of, examining archives and this and that, but the degree to which itself it is a creative act. And that if we keep a kind of experimental mindset, even as we're accruing knowledge, if we keep a kind of experimental mindset, then that is kind of first thought, best thought approach to even an archive or something like that. And the way Shreeti was talking about her process, is that a creation of an artwork, or is that a research into a question that she had? And so some of these things can start to get blurred. And in terms of concrete ideas for pedagogy, I mean, I will say, although this may be why I wasn't a good academic necessarily, or I'm going to out us all. Like intuition plays a great role in academic research, or what Wendelin is referring to as a kind of methodology without a method. You know, I'm sure many of us have had the experience of just like, you just have some intuition that this must be this way. And then kind of all the pieces fall together and you develop what is called an academic argument out of what started as a intuition. So how can we make that experience live for our students in the classroom? Would be maybe some things is like, let them write in the classroom more. So let them, you know, read some things and think about some things. And then instead of having pop quizzes, you have like pop free writing. And let them see what intuitions come through about this supposedly dry scholarship they might be reading or something like that.
Diane, may I make a really quick comment on that?
Yes, you can, and we'll have another question after, or a comment after. Yes, of course.
Just on the point of pedagogy, which is something that's always run alongside all of my work, is there's a lovely word in New Zealand, ako, Maori word, and it means teaching and it means learning, because they don't differentiate at all. And when I was undergraduate, one of the things that I appreciated most from some of my most wonderful teachers were the fact that they told stories about themselves and their experiences. And that was enough to inspire and generate a wish to find out more and to be able to share it with others. Just a little reflection on what you were saying.
Thank you. Yeah. I
I
was
think
going to say Virupa, but I know.
I think something that this ending with this particular panel, I think, is particularly powerful for more reasons than I have time to list here and now. But one thing, Dan, that you mentioned is this notion of practice as research and research as practice. While it didn't maybe come so through in my lecture today, when I was doing coursework for my PhD earlier on, I did a doctoral minor in the performance studies department from a sort of theoretical perspective. And during my time in the performance studies department at UC Davis, I found out that, I'll sort of plug my beloved UC Davis quickly, I found out that UC Davis was one of the first universities to allow their performance studies PhD students to use practice as a form of research, so they can choose which track they want to take, a sort of traditional research methodology or a practice as research methodology. And so I was sort of meditating on that mantra of practice as research, research as practice, and it occurs to me that practice, obviously, in a Buddhist studies university that's located within a monastery, practice has a whole number of valences to it, right? Even beyond maybe what my performance studies professors meant by practice, right? We've talked about art practice, but then we've also talked about sadhana. We've talked about all kinds of other practices. And so one thing that I will definitely, ending with this sort of the danda here at the end of the conference, with returning to this notion of practice as research and research as practice. One thing that I'll really walk away from this conference with, and which I invite the other speakers and panelists and audience, and perhaps maybe even something that can be thought about or talked about in future iterations of this conference, which I hope will take place, is to really contemplate what that means, right? And that doesn't necessarily that's more of a rhetorical question. It doesn't necessarily have to have an answer, though it can methodologically. But what does it mean to to bring our practice into our research and to see our research as an extension of our practice. So I'm so grateful for our panelists here and for all the panelists, but especially this for really I almost feel embarrassed that having done a doctoral minor in performance studies that I'm just now feeling so struck by this question. But I will definitely walk away from this conference really thinking much more deeply about what that means for me and how I can better integrate the two. So thank you, and thank all the other panelists and audience and everybody. Thank you all.
Thank you all for your comments, and I'm very happy that somehow the discussion ends with the question of pedagogy, since we are here at Rangjung Yeshe Institute, and with my colleagues we have had regularly discussions about how and what do we want to teach in our classes. And of course, this idea of embodiment, the idea of strengthening intuition and wisdom rather than conveying facts, that is at the core of all our pedagogical endeavors here. The question is always, how do you do that? Yeah, Shreeti just brought up this idea of having, sounded like workshop-based performance on the spot in the classroom. That is one way. When it comes to bringing out the intuition, the seeing in our students and also in ourselves, I find the work of Victor Hori very interesting, and sorry for the repetition. I am mentioning him often. He was one of my teachers at McGill University, and coming with a PhD in philosophy, but then spending many years in a Zen monastery. He thought deeply about how intuition and wisdom comes out, and the astonishing statement that he comes up with is that it is a product of structure, of rote learning, of memorizing, and only within this kind of frame where certain Dharma concepts become second nature, then when spontaneity comes out, then it is useful. Spontaneity in the sense of just blubbering out whatever comes into the ordinary mind, we would all agree that doesn't make sense. Yeah. So in this institution, Rangjung Yeshe Institute, I think we have quite a good balance, yeah, with this very traditional studying in the Kempo classes, and then in the academic classes we have a range of being very structured towards being more experiential. And I think all of that together in the programs, when students really take the time to explore and go deeply into the matter, there is the possibility for this kind of seeing and intuition really to come out in a meaningful way. And so I want to thank Diane and all the participants in this conference for having shown us glimpses of this kind of learning and seeing and expressing. Thank you all.
Thank you. There are two panelists that maybe could give us their takeaway left in the room. Alejandro, Martin, I'd like to hear from you.
Yes, well, two things. Just harking back, I think, to something that Peter said. I'm interested in how we can let the sky come through our practice, our art, our research, in the way that perhaps the sky can be a symbol of like truth or higher knowledge. So how can we be subtle? How can we be soft, fresh, and have that breath to allow the energy of the heaven to come? One, that is one. And just on what Julia said, I think memory is a key thing to pedagogy that I don't see so much in Western universities. Like they say, oh, you're just memorizing. Like, okay, I think memory, you have this expression, knowing by heart, cantasta and such, having in the throat ready to make it your own and use it. And just to conclude what Julia said, like memory being key to spontaneity, I will remind everyone that the mother of the muses is Mnemosyne, memory. memory is the mother of all artistic endeavors. Yeah.
Well, I won't add too much. So much has been said already, especially the points made by Julia were very similar to my thoughts before I was asked to speak. But I would say one thing that I don't think has been said before is, in a pedagogical note, is the willingness of teachers to learn from their students. It just as teaching and learning in the Maori concept that we just heard about are two sides of the same coin. Similarly, a non-hierarchical approach towards education, so that learners are both, students and teachers are learning from each other. I think this is critical, and I see this here at the Rangjung Yeshe Institute embodied. Yeah.
So thank you so much, everyone. It's been a real pleasure. So, to conclude, I thank all of you for having participated in this conference, close and far. Special thanks again and again, to the organizing committee, the group of volunteers, and our hero, unseen hero, Dorjila. Without him, we would not be here in the same state, I'm sure. It is really a privilege to be part of this journey with all of you. And finally, since the tradition invites us to the end, invites us at the end of anything with an opening rather than a closing, RYI's community holds the wish to pursue such discussions. So stay tuned in the future. And we may be able, if we make a wish, may we be able to respond creatively to all the challenges ahead of us. So good luck and looking forward to see you again.